Good morning, everyone. My name is Sany Abdulbaki. I'm a freelance actor. I'm a part-time faculty member here in the theater department in EUB and in LEUB+. So I will be moderating today's session on student work and activism around issues related to discrimination and sexual harassment. So I'll first start with a brief intro on our panelists, who will be presenting in the same order. We'll have a short Q&A session after their presentations. So to begin with, our first speaker will be Tamara Saade. She's a media and communication senior student and a soon-to-be unemployed 20-year-old aspiring to be a photojournalist. She's a feminist. Tamara is a feminist since she realized that even though she was one of the best students in her math class, boys who would get lower scores than her could get better jobs because they were boys. She has no clue about what to do with her life later on, only that she wants to work in journalism, travel, meet people, teach them about what she knows and learn from them, and leave the world in a better state than how she first saw it. So, Tamara will be presenting a brief history of feminism in Lebanon. Natalia Rabahi is a graduate student in mass communication with a minor in political science at the University of Balamand. She has a BA in journalism from Pontifical Catholic University of Goiás in Brazil, and will present her ongoing thesis research about women's representation on Lebanese television. Then our third speaker will be Diana Chmeit, who is a student at the Lebanese International University in the Beirut campus, majoring in radio TV third year, in the communication arts department, and a passionate volunteer for the past 6 years, and general assembly manager in the Lebanese Red Cross youth department in Alay. She has participated and worked in different workshops centered on sex, gender, and society with different NGOs through Red Cross. She will be presenting a research proposal on the role of pop culture in the construction of gender identity and the breaking of gender norm in the Lebanese contemporary society. Marc Ghazali is a political science student and a political activist aspiring to make a change in the social and political environment of Lebanon. He's a freelance writer for Beirut.com and recently started doing weekly walking tours in downtown Beirut. The topic of Marc's presentation will be masculinity in Zghorta. Perla Chaar is a second-year mechanical engineering student. She's a member of the EUB Feminist Club, a political and social activist. She is also a member of the Title IX Action Committee, which she will brief us about and share her experience as a student. Finally, Patrick Haddad, our last speaker on the panel, is a graduate student in English literature at EUB. He's the co-founder and current president of the Gender and Sexuality Club, as well as a formative member of the Title IX Student Action Committee. Patrick will be presenting some of the problems and difficulties that students face when trying to mobilize. So, we'll start off with our first speaker, Ms. Tamara Saade.
Now, since its creation in 1837, the word feminism has adapted to the changes in the world and the evolution of the movement. Now, for the purpose of this research, I'm going to define feminism as the social, political, economical, and sexual equality of both sexes, just to make this easier, because it's a lot more complicated than that. Now, in the world, in the Arab world, and in Lebanon, feminism matters because it's time to put an end to the patriarchal order of society. It's time to put an end to the discrimination of women. Now, young women are the most susceptible catalysts because they have almost all the tools needed to make a complete change in the world. Now, the objective of my presentation is to shed light on the modern feminism in Lebanon and how it evolved from an elite-restricted movement to a more global lobby. And I will do so by first giving a historical overview of feminism in Lebanon, its introduction to Lebanon, and feminism in today's Lebanon. Now, for a long time, the West appropriated itself the notion of feminism, ignoring all other countries who already had women's movements. Now, Western feminists saw themselves as superior to Arab women because they considered Arab feminism to be nothing more than deviants of the main Western feminist movement. Now, there are no such things as different types of feminism, but the idea of feminism as a legitimate and institutionalized movement did come from the West. Now, I just want to point out that this does not justify colonization or oppression in any way. Now, during the 19th century, colonizers who occupied Arab countries brought with them the literature and ideologies concerning feminism. It later on became an educated elite of Lebanon who formed activist groups. Now, an important point to highlight here is that the feminist behavior, meaning the reclamation of equal rights for both men and women, already existed in those Arab countries. Therefore, the West did not bring feminism to Lebanon, but it rather influenced those countries to concretize their beliefs into official movements. Now, Lebanon saw its first feminist movement in the 1920s. So at that time, the major advocacy groups demanded basic rights, such as the access to education, voting, and equal representation. Now, in 1953, women gained the right to vote. In the 70s, unfortunately, the Civil War eclipsed women's movements, although those movements still gain importance on the international scene. Now, for women to come in contact with feminist ideologies and literatures, they had to belong to a certain class that allowed them to critically think about their position. Now, Huda Sha'rawi perfectly embodies this example of feminism. Sha'rawi had a window on the world where women received almost the same education as men, and to a certain point could be equal to men. She first formed her organization in 1908, and to this day is still seen as one of the founding mothers of the movement for women's rights in the Arab world. Now, on the other hand, lower class women were excluded from the social movement because of their lack of awareness concerning the issue. Because they were educated and brought up in traditional families and environments, they were not exposed to such ideologies, and were kept away from the revolutionary movements happening and formed a cycle on their own. Now, Laura Mhazel may be the exception that confirms the rule. She became one, if not the most important figure of feminism in Lebanon. After entering law school, Mhazel fought for Lebanese women's rights, and to this day, Lebanese women owe her the right of traveling without her husband's permission, as well as the equal division of the heritage between brothers and sisters. Now, the legacy of all those important figures led to the emergence of new feminist movements, especially amongst young women. Now, as opposed to the previous types of feminism, the modern movements have a larger reach and aren't restricted to an elite, such as portrayed in Nadine Lebaki's movie Balamand. Now, the movie shows the story of 4 different women who come from various religious sects, social classes, and generations, and who meet in a beauty parlor and share their everyday problems. Now, the way feminism is portrayed in this movie is not particularly to the issues those women go through, but to the way they support each other and talk about these issues. Now, Lebaki proves how modern feminism became a social movement, not restricted or limited to any particular sect or class, but on the contrary, reuniting all those women under a common umbrella. Lebaki also includes a very important minority that is often forgotten in Lebanese feminist movement, which is the queer community. By having Lima, a homosexual character, as one of the main characters, Lebaki proves that feminism isn't limited to a heteronormative ideology. Now, university students are also joining the movement from a rather young age. In an ethnography done in the 1990s, Catherine Kikoski explored female students' understanding of feminism. Now, it appears that young female students did not get their feminist education from academic resources or main actresses, but from their environments. Moreover, the common points that Kikoski found amongst all the students was their desire to be independent from any man and prioritize their own success and happiness. Now, previous waves of feminism used to focus only on women's role in the society, as a mother, as a daughter, as a wife, and as a citizen. Feminism today tackles issues about women and how they perceive themselves as independent entities, and issues such as body image, sexual harassment, and gender discrimination. Now, the most recent phase of feminism in Lebanon has been its introduction to social media. Now, forums and platforms help women across the country and across the world share their experiences, concerns, insights, and even get feedback. Now, unfortunately, to have access to those forums, feminists should own a computer or an internet connection, which still remains a luxury in Lebanon, which brings me to the limitations of my study. So, unfortunately, it would be too idealistic to say that feminism had a Hollywood success story, going from an elite restricted movement to a global ideology. Now, because to this day feminism remains limited, and because the word feminism still has a very negative and pejorative connotation in Lebanon. Now, the lack of historical data in Lebanon makes it harder to trace a complete timeline of the movement. So if I forgot some important steps, please forgive me and just tell me later on. I'd be curious to know about it. Now, finally, it's only after I was done with my research that I noticed that no men were mentioned in the history of feminism. This does not mean that feminism is restricted to women, on the contrary, but it might be that they do not play any important role in the evolution of feminism in Lebanon. Now, throughout time, feminism in Lebanon has evolved from a privilege in some way, according to a few wealthiest, to a global opportunity for all women from various social, cultural, or religious backgrounds to meet and find support in each other. Now, a complete democratization of feminism might still take some time to achieve, but with the emergence of social media and an easier access to feminist spaces, the movement started reaching a broader public. Most importantly, it started including minorities that were previously ignored, such as migrant workers and transsexuals. Now, with the new generation of modern feminists, there is hope that the future feminist movement might one day unite together to fight as one for the same cause. Thank you.
So we'll have our next speaker, Ms. Natalia Rabahi, presenting on women's representation on Lebanese television.
Hi, Sabaya.
Hi. So my topic of research is women's representation on Lebanese television, and I focused on a very controversial television show, which is Take Me on the Ashid. So I just want to introduce a very brief video of the show.
كيفكن صبايا؟ يقبرني بدك ايه ميل عم لك ميل بريد بالشاب اللبناني شبانك ايفون انت شو بتلبسي قبل ما تنامي؟ اذا عم تاخذي سلفيات قبل ما تنامي وهيك تبقي خبريني يا عيب شو ما عليك؟ هي من 20 سنه ولا شفلوقه، انت كم شفلوقه؟ بتحبيه طويل؟ بدك تبوسي او ما بدك تبوسي؟ كيف عصينا خويه؟ لك يا برني اختي انا يا برني شو الشيء اللي ما بتعمليه مقابل 10 مليون دولار؟ عن جد بتعمل شو ما كان كرمال 10 مليون دولار؟ انا اكيد انه في اشياء كثير طيبه بجعفر انت بعد ما بتعرفيها.
So that's just a little introduction of the host, Fuad Yamin. Where is it? Okay. So this is my topic of an ongoing research for my thesis, for my master thesis. So I focused my research question is, how is Take Me on the Ashid representing women in Lebanon? So a little bit of background for Arab reality television. It's very controversial, particularly when it's a format show that comes from Europe or the US. The premise of reality television is that it should represent reality. But how realistic can these shows be if it doesn't represent the audience demographics? So in the Arab world, television is not very, television reality, it's not brand new. Shows like Arab's Got Talent and Arab Idol, Big Brother have really caught the eye of the Arab viewer. And in case of competitions such as superstar. You have Lebanese competitors and Syrian competitors. The nations, they really become, they really enjoy watching this competition on television. So, but dating shows, they have yet to cause the same sensation as talent competition shows in the Arab world. And Take Me Out Ashit is one of the first, if not the first, dating show aired on Lebanese television. And it's a format show that has been broadcasted in Thailand, UK, Ireland, Italy, and many other countries. So my interest on this research is to really find out how this show is representing the women on the dating show and what sorts of tools are used for this representation. So for this research, I focused on 3 theories: symbolic power, symbolic violence, and symbolic annihilation. So first, onto symbolic power and violence. Pierre Bourdieu really talks about symbolic power and how it symbolic violence derives from symbolic power. So these two concepts are really linked with each other. And Pierre Bourdieu defines symbolic power as the power to construct reality, which tends to establish and maintain an order. So usually symbolic power comes along with capital. There are spoken and unspoken rules, which for Bourdieu allows for the field, the competitive structure, to work as a form of censorship. The censorship can be seen as the way the host discusses certain topics with the women. The host rules the space of the game and confers or withdraws legitimacy upon the contestants. And judgment is the heavy artillery of the symbolic violence used in the show. Not only are the host and the producers of the show symbolically violent to the women participants, but also the audience. And since symbolic violence is soft violence and not physical, it's not seen as violence. So Bourdieu writes that terrorism of the peremptory verdicts, which in the name of taste, condemn to ridicule, indignity, shame, silence, men and women who simply fall short in the eyes of their judges of the right way of being and doing. So if we don't think that this is the way someone should behave, we simply ridicule them. Moving on from symbolic violence to symbolic annihilation, we have Gay Tuckman, who argues that women are symbolically annihilated by television's portrayal of unhealthy sex role stereotyping and female underrepresentation. So symbolic annihilation is intrinsically related to symbolic violence because both are used as tools of oppression. It derives from the underrepresentation or the misrepresentation of any given minority. In this case, it's the misrepresentation of women. So I analyzed how society has been taking Take Me Out, how they have really responded to it. The women participants of Take Me Out have been called by a lot of names by media, by Lebanese media. So the power that society holds on the female body is what makes it feminine. Dress like this, behave like that, wear your hair and makeup like this. The feminine body is trained to be feminine, which is in accordance to Simone de Beauvoir. One isn't born a woman, one becomes one. So centrally, Bartke talks about, she analyzed Foucault's Panopticon theory according to the woman's body and patriarchal power. According to her, the loose woman are women who looks at whatever and whomever she pleases. And Bartke also writes that the nice girl learns to avoid the bold and unfeathered staring of the loose woman. So with this, society has established that the nice girl should be modest, with a touch of erotic, graceful and restrained. Quoting Bartke, the female gaze is trained to abandon its claim to the sovereign status of seer. In other words, if a woman does not avoid male gaze, does not look down when men look at her, and dresses as she chooses, whether it's vulgar or not, she is not a nice girl, she's a loose girl. So for Bartke, women live in their bodies as seen by an anonymous patriarchal other. The idea that someone is always watching, so you should always behave in a feminine way, the nice girl way. So this is a doxic society in which we live in, and doxic society for Bourdieu means that it seems that there's no space for transformation or change. Our society holds the symbolic power. It is symbolically violent, and at times physically violent, towards the women. The people with this kind of power refuse to let go of it, and they refuse to confer legitimacy upon the women's rights, and they try to diminish women who appear on television simply to participate on a dating game. So I analyzed Take Me Out. It was really fun. So there are many ways you can analyze Take Me Out Ashit. Structurally, it gives the men, the hosts, and the participants all the power. It annihilates women by implying that they need to be protected and need to have a man in their lives, and it is violent in the way it is conducted. The first impression of the show is that the women have the power to decide who they want to go out with, but in the end, it's the men who get to choose who they're going to take out on a date. By language and behavior, we can see that the dialogue used by the host of the show sets the tone of the conversation. And these are some of the questions the host, has asked all the women participants, some of them. What do you wear before bed? Did he let you touch anything else? What would you do for $10 million? There are a lot of delicious things about him you haven't tried yet. What is the best thing you touched in him, and do you like it long? So all these questions were addressed to the women by the host. And they have no other choice but to answer it in a jokingly way. So by comparing the UK version to the Lebanese version, you see that the UK version is about 40 minutes of program, and the host spends only 5 minutes talking to the participants in the beginning of the show. And the topics of conversation are physical strength, skills, jobs, career, past relationships, things we talk about on our first date. But Take Me Out Ashit, we have more than 1 hour program. The host spends 20 minutes of the beginning of the show talking to what it seems it's the same contestants all the time about topics of cohabitation, sleeping habits, all of the questions. They kind of have sexual innuendos and are daring questions too. So we see that the Take Me Out version, the UK version, you have sexual innuendos, but they come from the participants. The host, he's merely a moderator. You don't have these sexual jokes coming from him. He actually tries to avoid them. While in the Lebanese version, you actually have the host pushing for sexual innuendos and sexual answers also. So Take Me Out Ashit could have approached the game in a simpler and less patriarchal format. It could have been a show strictly about the dating game, more similar to other versions of Take Me Out. So my conclusion is that Take Me Out Ashit is symbolically violent to the women and to women's issues, and the women are not represented fairly or even represented at all. And I have a final question for you guys to think about that. Does reality television have the potential to discuss women's position in society and issues pertaining to them and be entertaining at the same time? So thank you very much.
So we'll have our next speaker will be Ms. Diana Chmeit, presenting on the role of pop culture in the construction of gender identity and the breaking of gender norm in the Lebanese contemporary society.
Hello, first, my name is Diana, like he mentioned. I'm an LIU student majoring in radio TV. And this research proposal was a product of a class assignment instructed by the amazing Rita Barata. So I started looking for something to write and do that I won't be annoyed for the next 4 months. And gender and pop culture kind of popped out because they're important, they're personal, and they're kind of our everyday basis. We all watch TV, open Facebook, or all of that. So you see, women behave similarly 98%, but the difference comes out so strongly in the media. Just think of the last ad you watched. The last ad I watched was Prince Soleil ad for vegetables. Apparently the woman in that ad, the only thing she does is
Sorry, everyone.
technical problems.
Or you can sit.
Hello, sorry, technical problems happened. So women and men behave similarly over 98% of the time, but the only difference comes out really in the media. Just think of the last ad you watched, a Lebanese ad. The last ad I watched was Prince which is basically tells that women, the only thing they do is store moonie for the winter, and the men does all the fun stuff, right? So despite that ad, Lebanese media has seen a significant change, and that has reflected on society. So I started asking myself questions like, stupid questions, but how does media affect the way we behave and dress? What influences the change in our beliefs regarding gender norms, and what is socially accepted to talk about? So I formulated my hypothesis, the role of pop culture in the construction of gender identity and the breaking of gender norms in the contemporary Lebanese society. First, what is really gender? While sex is biological, it is physiologically what promotes us to be assigned as male and female. Gender, on the other hand, is what a person identifies him or herself as. It is not binary, it is a spectrum. More of gender is socially constructed. It consists of ideas we have about masculinity, femininity, and how we apply it according to our sex. We learn gender through our intersection with people, family, cultural texts, educational systems, objects like toys, cars, religion, and media and pop culture. Hence, what is pop culture? Pop culture is not Kim Kardashian alone. It's more than that. It refers to images, narratives, ideas that circulate within the mainstream culture. They are popular because they are known by the masses. So I applied the theory of Maxwell, McCombs, and Donald Chon, the agenda-setting theory function, that says the power of news media to set a nation's agenda to public attention on a few key public issues is on immense and well-documented influence. The methods I'm using in my research are comparison method, starting with Lebanese television from TV shows, game shows, from queer characters in Lebanese shows like غلطة عمري, عشق النساء, البيضاء, to shows with more traditional gender norm-bound characters like Sajina, Familia, مش ظابطة, and also challenging characters. Our focus will be on story, character development, role, whether it's main or recruiting. Also, we're going to apply the Makomori test that states that there should be one girl at least that has her own narrative that is not supporting a man or a boy story. Also, we're going to apply the same thing to movies. Movies like Out Loud, Caramel, The Beirut Apartment, ولعت عقبالكم, هلا لوين, and many others. We're also going to discuss many other aspects in pop culture like drag history, our international drag queen figure Bassem Ghali, and many others. Lebanese music, like your very own AUB band, international band, Mashra Layla, that challenges gender norms in half of their songs, if not all. And more traditional artists like Muhammad Skandar, Miriam Klink, and many others. Male belly dancers that challenge the gender norm of females are belly dancers like Alexandra Beach. Theater, also, from Comedy Nightlife with Mario Basil, that highlights stereotypes and sexual connotations, to plays that deal with gender norm struggles like Kifik Layla and many others. We're also going to pull a focus group of 9 units from the Lebanese society. We're going to recruit our participants. They're not random. And we're going to see how they link pop culture and their formation of gender identity through open-ended questions. We're going to have in-depth interviews with media analysts and experts, and gender experts. The limitation of this research is first Article 534 of the Lebanese Penal Code that is still applied in some places in Lebanon, sadly. Society's rejection to discuss subjects like gender norms due to the dominancy of religion and tradition, everything outside the AUB, basically. Resources, money talks. Finding convenient time to meet, the limitation related to the research in general, and the burden of conducting this research is being put into recruiting people who are willing to talk. My beneficiaries are NGOs, basically. NGOs like Halam and Proud Lebanon that deal with gender-related issues in cases and work on getting queer rights and presentation, and NGOs like Kafa Himaya that deal with gender equality issues and female presentation. The expected result is how pop culture helps in the breaking of one's how pop culture helps in the breaking of gender norms through defining one's identity, social conscious, experiences of marginalization, strategies for managing one's gender identity in the face of homophobic, transphobic, and sexist society. Yes, we're all this. There are 3 themes that are expected to be mentioned by all participants. Consider political views, ego-synodic and compatible with one's sexual identity expression. Desires or opposes the power of self-define. Is aware of socio-historical, socio-cultural context and influence of one's identity formation. We will revise through a recursive process of category under the title Pop Culture, which entails returning to raw data, identifying categories, core ideas, and recognizing when categories seem to interact or subsume each other. Finally, we'll reach our results. The time frame of this research proposal is 9 months to be able to do all of this. Thank you so much for letting me be part of this.
Okay, so our next speaker will be Mr. Marc Ghazali, Masculinity in Sparta.
Hi, my name is Marc and I'll be presenting a study that I did last semester on masculinity in Sgharta. Now there's a stereotype in Lebanon about the men from the northern town of Sgharta. Don't mess with a scorched man because he's easily offended, easily provoked, bad-tempered, and will respond in a violent way, most notably by shooting you with the gun that is on his waist. So the purpose of the study was to study the wide spectrum of masculinities, but mostly focusing on the 2 extremes, the men that are considered macho, that still carry a gun in their waist, and men that are considered soft, like male dancers and artists. And I wanted to see how masculinity gets constructed there. Now, I did 8 interviews and literature review in order to get to my results. So the scorched men perceive themselves somehow similar to the stereotype, but in a discourse of bravery, glory. They see themselves as the lions of the north. They are heroes, warriors, live according to honor, integrity, and virtues. And they're also very generous. Now, why did this violent stereotype emerge? Well, it's because of the violent history that Sgharta witnessed throughout history. Since the 16th century, Sgharta was located on the border of Maronite Mount Lebanon and next to Islamic Tripoli. So during the Mamluk era and the Ottoman era, the scorched men became warriors against what they perceived as an external threat, which is neighboring Tripoli. And from the 1950s till 1975, Zgharta witnessed a long series of family vendettas between the 5 major families. Now, what you have to know, in the interviews that I did, I asked the people, what are the characteristics of a Scorched man? And most of them agreed on the following: self-confident, does not tolerate insult, generous and hospitable, and a man of principle. What you have to know is that there has been a shift in Zgharta. The man now doesn't prove himself by being macho and strong, but more by proving financial wealth. Very few people still carry guns today on their waist, mostly men from lower classes and unemployed men. Now I'm going to talk about how these two extremes perceive this shift. So the macho men that still carry a gun on their waist, and they were carrying the gun when I was interviewing them, they perceive this shift negatively. For them, masculinity is tightly linked to this image of the scorched warrior that defends his territory, his land, and the honor of his family. So for them, masculinity is disappearing. You can't find real men today in Zgharta. While on the other hand, the soft men that I interviewed perceive this shift positively, and they think it's because of education. But they do believe that a scorched man should be self-confident. Well, there's something interesting that I noticed when I asked most of the people, how does society perceive soft men? They mainly confused it with homosexual men. So, although nobody said macho or heterosexual in the characteristics, but I think this confusion might imply that these are also norms to be a man. Now, regarding the way these men perceive each other, it's very complicated, but basically the macho men do make fun of the soft men, but they do it in private circles, between friends, never publicly, because Zgharta is characterized by a collective solidarity, where there's no interest in destroying the individual. So what they do is that they give excuses and they justify the weakness of these men. So let's say, they might say that he's an artist, that's why he does not comply with this image of the scorched warrior. He can do whatever he wants, he's a dancer. So what they do is that they justify and find excuses. And the most interesting finding is that a lot of factors shape masculinity in Zgharta. It's not just about being macho or not. You have social factors, economic factors, and political factors as well. So it depends on how wealthy you are, who are your parents, or for example, there's the relative of one of the most important Zaims in Zgharta, who is perceived as effeminate by all of the people that I interviewed. But since he is the relative of this very strong politician in Zgharta, one of the interviewees said that he's feared more than any man carrying a gun. So it's not just about carrying a gun and being macho or not. Now, most of the people were telling me stories about honorable killings from the past, and when I tried to ask them about a recent story, a story that happened recently, they couldn't, and they felt like I was exposing their secret in my paper, like I was going to expose that the myth is wrong, the stereotype is wrong. Now, why would they want to hold on to this stereotype or to this myth? Well, it's like a duty. If you're a man, you have to keep the myth alive. For some, like the macho men, this is everything they have to hold on to in the midst of the disappearance of masculinity. And for other people, it might provide security. One of the interviewees said he's a male dancer that does not identify himself with the stereotype. He said, when I get stopped at an army checkpoint, the first thing that I say is, I'm from Zgharta. Because it kind of creates fear, and it's a sort of a shield. So for the army officer to let him pass. So in conclusion, the myth is not compatible with the reality. You have no killings, no warriors today. But the men there and the boys are raised on these myths, and they have to keep them alive. Thank you.
So our next speaker will be Ms. Perla Chaar, about defining the Title IX Action Committee and sharing her experience as a student on that committee.
everyone. So I'm Perla, and I'll be talking about Title IX and the Action Committee, which came to be as of last semester. So what is the Title IX Action Committee, and how is it being a student in such a position? Our Action Committee is formed of 15 volunteer students from different faculties and majors, all dedicated to address and help prevent discrimination and harassment in AUB. We meet almost every week to discuss the updates on cases and policies, and discuss our next steps to tackle the issues of harassment and discrimination on campus. What is Title IX? Title IX is the name of the gender equity law that prohibits discrimination and harassment on the basis of sex and gender. Title IX seeks to reduce or eliminate barriers of educational opportunity caused by sex discrimination. As an institution receiving federal funding from the US, AUB is forced by law to abide by this policy. Title IX protects AUB students on campus, off campus, at AUB and AUB MC events, and on cyberspace. Now, what is prohibited by policy in Title IX? Sex and gender discrimination, sexual misconduct, including sexual harassment, non-consensual sexual contact, non-consensual sexual intercourse, and sexual exploitation. How prevalent is sexual harassment on campus? Well, we don't have the data about that, but because most of the incidents go unreported due to lack of knowledge that the AUB community is under the protection of such a law, or because of fear of retaliation. But a report on the Association of American Universities Climate Survey on sexual assault and sexual misconduct stated that 47% of students said that they were victim of sexual harassment since they were enrolled. 61.9% of female undergraduates said that they were sexually harassed, and the highest rate of harassment was in the TGQN, transgender, genderqueer, questioning, and non-stated category, which was 75%. All this, and only 7.7% of incidents of sexual harassment were actually reported to the office. Now, our goals and activities as a committee, we do our best to be a link between the students' body and the administration, and to bring student voices into decisions, programs, and policies. The fact that we as students are voluntarily put in such a position where we can help other students has made quite a difference over the past few months, where we actually noticed that after launching our awareness committee, the number of reports to Title IX more than doubled from what it was last year. So we're actually very proud of that. Part of our tasks as the Action Committee focus on bringing awareness to the AUB community, on several issues, including what to do in cases of direct or indirect sexual harassment, how to report, and what I personally found extremely useful, bystander interventions. As students, we are finally able to fight discrimination and harassment effectively, because working on this committee means reaching out to wider circles and on the issue, and helping not only students on campus, but also in the broader sense, people off campus. Thank you.
Okay, so our last speaker for today will be Mr. Patrick Haddad, who will be presenting some of the problems and difficulties that students face when trying to mobilize for such actions.
Hello, so I'm Patrick Haddad, and I'll be talking as the Action Committee. As Perla said, we are a new group on campus with unique possibilities in representing student needs to the administration, given that we are loosely tied to the Office of Title IX. Because we're still experimenting and developing our capabilities as a group, often, is that okay? that okay? Okay, so because we're still experimenting and developing our capabilities as a group, often we repeatedly note challenges to these efforts on campus. For the most part, we can understand these challenges by looking at them from two angles. Problems in reaching students, and two, problems at the administrative level. In the first case, as a committee that advocates for student needs in regards to harassment and discrimination policies, our first step was to involve a large part of the campus. This was successful to various degrees, but as a group we are still processing this need, and reaching students who aren't already part of an anti-discrimination initiative became increasingly difficult. So on that note, seeing as we are a new group on campus, if anyone does have any suggestion or any advice concerning that particular point, how to reach students who aren't already involved in anything yet, please do share them. Secondly, in regards to problems at the administrative level, there is one thing we need to keep in mind about large institutions. The internal bureaucracy established within large institutions, such as AUB, signify processes and paperwork to ensure transparency take significantly longer than students prefer. This may create distrust or resentment. I mean, it does, it obviously does. In addition to that, the administration itself initiated changes to ensure better practice with our anti-discrimination and harassment policies, but for the most part, these are invisible to students, and the long-term projects can be seen as too slow. Personally, as someone who was working on campus on similar initiatives before joining the Action Committee, I understand the distrust of the efficacy of the administration in dealing with harassment and discrimination. In our case, we as a group try to keep up with the changing position of AUB, so we maneuver within this window of opportunity, where we try to represent student needs while working in this, aura of distrust and institutional changes. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Due to some, because we have just a little bit of time left, I think we can use maybe 5 minutes for a Q&A if anyone has any questions on any of the presentations. To any of the panelists.
I have a question. You said about Naasha, the host is a guy. What if he's a girl?
Do I need to skip the mic? Yes. So the idea is that Naasha could be improved to empower women to discuss issues, or to certainly just be a simple dating show. So one of the ideas that I have, this is still an ongoing research, I'm still working on my thesis, but the idea is that, maybe what if we have a woman presenting the show? Is it going to change something? What if but what we do know is that there are women producing the show. So if we have a host that is a woman, is there going to be any difference? So these are the kind of things that it's still early to know, that these are things that we would know if we could interview, the producers and NBC and things like that. So I think it would help, maybe.
I have another question for you as well. When you were talking about symbolic violence that is being inflicted symbolically on the participants, don't you think that really the symbolic violence is being inflicted on the participant from the people watching and people judging this behavior? Because the only way that most of the women can actually get to their personal freedom of desire and sexual desire is actually from adopting this loose girl persona, let's say, to get out of a conventional or more conservative context.
It comes from the audience, it comes from the hosts too, it comes from the producers, that they want to almost enforce this sexuality upon the contestants and not let them decide how sexual they want to be on the show. every question has this a tone of a sexual innuendo, and it's kind of, you have to answer. You can't just, I'm not going to answer. It's a live show, so it comes from the audience too.
This goes to Marc. It's about the men in the north. My question would be, you said there's a change and it's perceived as negative by these macho men. It's perceived as positive by the soft men, as far as I got this right. Yeah, so there's a shift about these stereotypes of how a man should be, how masculinity is perceived. My question would be, where does this change come from? Does it come from these soft men, from actors, and or does it come from NGOs? And do you also know what's the stance of women on this shift? Did you get to know or ask women what they think about this image of masculinity as being the provider in the house and so on?
To answer your first question, this change, well, according to the interviewees, at least the soft men said that it's due to education, while the macho men said literally it's because of the internet, hence some sort of reference to globalization. But no, there is no NGO or activism going on to break this stereotype of a man. No, not at all. But you always have people who do break these norms, artists and dancers, and I use these examples because these are the people that I interviewed. But I mean, you always have these people that decide not to follow the norm, so of course they help as well. So I think these are the three main factors. Now, I interviewed 8 people. 2 of them were women. They were married to a man from Zgharta. For example, one of the women said that a man from Zgharta is not easily provoked more than a man from Tripoli or a man from Akkar. They just want to feel special. So I mean, for example, that's but they did agree on the characteristics that the escorted man is easily provoked. You know, he's a man of principle. He's generous. The characteristics that I showed, the 2 women that I interviewed also agreed on them. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I have a question for Tamara. At the beginning of your presentation, you said, if I remember well, there is no such thing as different feminism. I'm not so sure I really understand what you mean, because there have been different feminism theorized as radical or liberal or intersectional.
Okay. What I wanted to specify was that at that time, at the early stages of feminism, you had Western feminists who saw themselves as superior to, for example, Arab feminists, and they, for example, in the Middle East, they had a difference between Christian feminism, Jewish feminism, and Muslim feminism. And the thing I want to point out is the essence of feminism itself is the same. Now, of course, especially nowadays in the modern day and age, you have different deviants of feminism that target different purposes, but the main essence of it is the same in the end. To simplify it.
It's not a question, it's just a thought I wanted to share with all of you. First, it's amazing seeing how young you are and the way you're thinking at your age. I mean, it was not that long ago, but we weren't even using the terms you're using, thinking the way you're thinking, so at least that is that positive, regardless of what the outcomes would be. This is 1. 2, I was just sharing with my friend here, because also for media kind of implementation of new terms, gender today is like it's the in subject that people talk about. So now we can talk about this. I don't know how suddenly we can now discuss that. But regardless of that thought, I hope that for once we could use something that is in now, so we could end up doing something that would lead us somewhere. Thank you.
I can speak loudly.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. The title of this panel is Student Work and Activism on Issues of Harassment and Discrimination. This is for anyone who wants to answer. I'm curious, if you define your work as activist work, and if so, how, and what does that mean to you? And if you could just share a little bit more about what that role or word or responsibility means in your context. Should I start?
I'm going to start because I have the microphone. So just to focus on this research, as I said in my introduction, I felt that especially in Lebanon, we lack a history of feminism. We have knowledge of feminism internationally, but we have no historical record whatsoever of feminism in our country. So I thought by doing this research, I could maybe contribute to the knowledge of people who are curious about feminism and what it really means in Lebanon.
I can add more. Activism is not always going to people and telling them stuff. It's sometimes about figuring how stuff works. So figuring how, for example, my research, pop culture works in our society can lead to really healthy activism. Once you know how something works, you can manipulate it, work on loopholes, and promote it. Like if you see a TV show that promotes, I don't know, female representation, that empowers women at home watching to do something. So media helps a lot in activism.
So basically, my presentation was mainly about student activism and AV on campus, and what the Action Committee is actually doing on issues of sexual harassment and discrimination. So it's all about student activism. It's how we're trying to work for a better community for us. And fight the good fight, So we'd have a good environment, a safe space, a safe environment for us. So that's student activism. That's what we hope to do by student activism.
I would like to add something. I would consider my study more related to the work part than the activism part. But the thing is, in order to make my study public in Zgharta would not be the right, I mean, if I do it now, it won't be the right way, because for them, I'm this urbanized man coming to preach and give these urban or Western values or whatever they might perceive it this way. But it might be a potential for future activism, because I guess activism can and usually starts with studies and a theoretical background, and then followed by work on the field. So, but for now, it's not really making a change at the time.
Anyone has any questions?
I think what you were asking was for proof or examples about actual groundwork. No? The question for Perla and Patrick: have any cases of harassment or misconduct been tackled by the committee yet? And what do you say about it?
Can you clarify that, please?
So, have any cases of harassment been reported and been worked on by the committee?
We don't handle specifically cases of harassment, as in the reports do not reach us. What we do is, first of all, we advise everyone to report to the Office of Title IX or to the online reporting. If you have electricity, we'll show you where.
Come out alone.
But they're saying that we should leave.
No. The electricity cuts off right now, but I'll come back in like 5 seconds.
They're not kicking us out. Yeah, so basically we advise everyone to report through the Office of Title IX, through the online reporting, and as Perla said, the reports have doubled since last year. So people are reporting much more. We don't handle the reports. We don't have responsibility of reporting, and we're not equipped for that.
What happens with the reports? Is any action taken?
Well, some sanctions do take place, but reports are based on confidentiality, so no retaliation takes place. So we're not at freedom to discuss that.
Exactly. But it is a long process in which a panel is involved to discuss every issue. So as to exactly what sanctions happen at which reports, we cannot tell you that. But we can say that they are happening quite frequently. And it is following some form of definite process.
Can I jump in and say something? Sorry, I'm Trudy Hodges, I'm the Title IX coordinator. Not every report results in a formal panel process. Things can be resolved and often are resolved informally, where, you know, in agreement with the person who's submitted the report. So not everything rushes to the panel process. But if it's something serious or it's warranted, then a panel is formed to address it. That's all.
Okay, hello. I just want to ask all the panelists about sectoral gender discrimination. Do you think that this gender discrimination is taking place in higher statistics in certain areas or in certain public spaces maybe? And how does that affect, in comparison, the amount of activism happening in those areas compared to the number of the declared discrimination reports happening? Where do you think are the most sectors that need such implementations? Lacking public spaces, the empowerment of women in public spaces, defensible spaces in cities. Do you think those are affecting the amount of activism? For example, Beirut and Zgharta, Ibn al-Day'a, for example, coming to Beirut, or Bint al-Day'a coming to Beirut. We're not seeing the amount of activism in different sectors in Lebanon as much as the capitalist cities like Beirut or Tripoli, but where do you stand on such activism? Do you think that maybe we should have more activism in Zgharta or more activism in Bsharri or Baalbek, because Shabl Baalbek is similar to Zgharta? So how is that affecting the role of activism in sectorial discrimination?
I don't think it really matters the number of public spaces, or if people want to change, they will change. For a lot of people that leave Zgharta, for example, and they come here to Beirut to study, for example, they feel like they can live more freely, but the thing is, back home in a small town, it's not about lack of public spaces or not. It's just because there are these dominant social norms or this dominant mentality, and there is no will to try to break it or change it. So I don't really think it's about having the means or not. It's more about having the will or not.
That's actually